Um, we'll just be here to, walk you through the interview, talk about some reasons as to why we applied to Imperial, and also have a couple of questions to practice as well.
Hi everyone, my name's Kieran. I'm a second year medic at Imperial, and hopefully this session will be useful for you guys. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name's Tista. I'm a third year medic. Hopefully this session will be very useful because I think most of us have experience actually tutoring for the interviews. So we'll have some nuggets of knowledge for you guys. Thanks.
Yeah, let's go for it then. Yeah, ready to go.
So I guess here's a little agenda of what we're going to cover today. So we're going to go through Imperial interviews, the course structure, why you apply to Imperial, some practice MMI scenarios, a bit about life at Imperial, a bit about finances at Imperial, and then end off with a Q&A. So we'll just get started now. So I guess with regards to the Imperial interview structure, there's 7 stations which they list on the website. So these are the 7 stations. So we've got teamwork and leadership, motivation to study medicine, understanding the role of a doctor, empathy and breaking bad news, ethics, Imperial and contribution to the School of Medicine, and resilience. And these are the only things that they say on the website. So I would make sure that if I was going to prepare for my interviews again, that I'll prepare examples of when I've been resilient, when I've used teamwork, why I'm applying to medicine, understanding more about the role of a doctor, the advantages of being a doctor, and the disadvantages of being a doctor. And then there's 6 points for content, so what you're saying, and 4 points for communication, which is how you're saying it. So yeah.
And
Just
just
about
one
the
thing I think may be worth having a think about. So I'm not sure if people are aware, but kind of you're not going to know what stations you're getting on the asynchronous and what stations you're getting on the face-to-face. But what you will know, and that's kind of completely in line with the NDA, is suppose you've done your asynchronous and you've got through 3 of these stations. So you've done a teamwork question, you've done an imperial and contribution to School of Medicine question, and you've done a resilience question. Well, then you have a good idea of what's going to come up in your next interview. So that's a good suggestion on maybe what to prepare for each of the 2 interviews. And Kieran will tell you a bit more about both of them, what that actually means, asynchronous and the other one.
Yeah, sure. So the first half of the interview is kind of an online asynchronous section. So I think like before you'll have access to this platform before to just get used to the kind of structure of it. But I think it's typically on Panopto. And essentially you kind of record answers to pre-recorded questions. And it's quite a very strange experience. You kind of feel like, I'd say like a vlogger kind of explaining your experiences. And then after that, later on in about February, you have the online face-to-face part, which takes place on Microsoft Teams with an actual interviewer talking to you. So yeah, and then generally you have the whole station is about 6 minutes long. You'll have 5 minutes to answer your question and 1 minute of reading time. And then there's 1 minute rest break between each station. So that's just a general interview structure. So yeah. We'll keep going. Okay, so these are just some pieces of interview advice and top, and I'm sure that the others will have some more advice as well that they can add on to. So the first piece of advice would be just be familiar with the software and platform use. So for example, know how to navigate Panopto. Do the trial stations that they give to get used to the platform, but just be aware that the real stations might be more challenging, especially in the asynchronous interview, because there's no person on the other side of the screen telling you what to do and things. Try to be quite animated, use hand gestures, alter your voice and your vocal intonation. Try and keep a good structure, like don't waffle and add more stuff. If you finish, kind of just stop, because sometimes if you just carry on talking and rambling on, it can kind of cause more harm to your score than benefit. And just make sure that they're structured, answers structured well. Show kind of a genuine enthusiasm and passion. Don't be kind of boring and robotic, in a sense that don't be like, I wanted to study medicine since I was like 2 years old, because it's probably not true. And there's always to show your kind of passion. Try not to speak too quickly. I always naturally just speak really, really quickly. So try to slow down and ensure that your answer is kind of like understandable. Try to control your nerves. I remember in my asynchronous interview, I was really, really nervous, and it kind of messed up the way that I was answering the question. But just be aware that like Imperial already know that you're really smart and really intelligent because you've got exceeded that kind of really high UCAT threshold, things like that. We just want to now see your personality and the potential that you have to be trained and molded into being a good doctor. And another piece of advice is just always link back to kind of medicine as a career or work experience, and monitoring examples of when you've used the skills. Where relevant, try to incorporate the ethical pillars. And then in the live interview, just kind of be nice to the interviewer, greet them, ask them how they are, tell them to have a nice day, kind of just simple things like that can be useful too. And sometimes in questions, they might reveal more information as the question kind of develops, especially for scenario-based questions. So sometimes if you change your opinion, they kind of like that, like if you do that. So make sure you reflect on why you change your mind and how the information changed your kind of thought process.
So let's
I'm not
see
sure if
if
the others
kind of
had any
anyone
other
else has any
advice.
tips too. But sort of one thing that I found was kind of really a big deal for this, and not like some of the other ones I did. They gave you a lot of questions in a relatively limited time space. And so Akshita, you can clarify the exact numbers, but from what I remember, it was 3 questions, 5 minutes, something like that, or even less. What was it, Akshita?
So it's 5 minutes for the station, and you can have 2 to 3 questions. So obviously, in the asynchronous, it'll be a set number, but then in the live online part, if they feel like maybe you're not on the right tracks or they want to get more information out of you, they can ask their own follow-up questions as well. So don't be caught off guard when that happens. Just be able to, you can take a moment to, collect your thoughts. You can just tell them, can I have a second to just think about this? And then that's if they ask you a surprise question. And then you can answer based on whatever knowledge you have or leading on from your previous answer. But I think one thing I would definitely say in terms of how you come across on camera, because obviously the asynchronous is something that not a lot of other unis have. It's quite unique to Imperial. So what's really important is recording yourself, practice, and I can't stress this enough. Like, being aware of how you come across on camera and the eye contact you're making, the body language that you're presenting yourself with on camera, and maybe using hand gestures if that's something you do naturally, don't force it. But just like demonstrating your enthusiasm, demonstrating your confidence. And as Kieran mentioned, like one thing that I also do naturally is talk really, really fast, especially when I'm nervous. So one thing I had to consciously practice doing was, talking slower just in general for all of my interviews, so I seem, a bit more calm and composed. So if you feel like that's something that you guys also experience, then maybe practice talking slower, and you'll pick it up when you're rewatching the videos, when you're practicing, recording yourself answering questions. So I think that's something that's really important. And as we mentioned, just be super enthusiastic, super happy, and, just really express your passion. It might seem a bit over the top, if that's like not how you naturally speak, but just show how much you want to be at Imperial, and hopefully that will come across to the interviewer.
I think we've got some really great tips from Akshita, and obviously she's first year, so she's actually done it more recently. I'm in third year, so that means I did this a while ago, but I actually remember getting 5 questions for 5 minutes, and these were not like short type questions. Each one could have easily been a 5 minute answer of their own. So I think do prepare for the absolute worst case scenario of 1 minute per question. It was so bad. And unlike these two who speak very fast, I am on the slower side. So I really struggled with time. I would really recommend genuinely maybe not memorizing your speech because then you'd start just stumbling over your words. And if you forget one word, you're done for. But really memorize the points you're going to get across and the keywords you want to get across. The keywords are everything because that's what they're looking for. Um, so we'll try get those across and practice doing at least 1 minute per question. Just be ready for 1 minute because if you start stumbling your words, you need to account for your own sort of mistakes within that 5 minutes as well. So that's one thing. Second thing is clearly they're not using Panopto anymore, as someone has mentioned in the chat. But generally, Imperial FEO team is probably the most helpful, most sort of responsive team I've ever had. So if you have questions, if you have doubts, ask them. And also someone mentioned the webinar. Please go to that webinar. I cannot tell you how important it is to go to the webinar because that way you can ask all the questions you need to because they do answer them. And also, back in my day, I feel really old, but they actually gave hints. They dropped hints about the interview. I don't know if it was because my anonymous self was constantly asking about the interview, and that sort of forced them to drop some hints. But just be there and keep asking, what sort of questions are coming? Are they scenario based? Are they like, oh, are they very standard? So that's one thing. Another thing about these questions, they tend to be quite standard. Very, top 20 questions. Um, Obviously, we have the NDA, I think. I can't really give away the questions, but when I say they're standard, they're very, very standard. So prepare for the common ones. And also, I don't know if it has changed the stations that come up in the asynchronous, but they tended to be, well, am I allowed to say that? Maybe I'm not allowed to say that. I'm not allowed to say that. Fine, I can't say that. But essentially, I would really work on your examples, but there are also the sort of more, I think one of the questions is like ethical type scenario. They tend to really like the situational judgment scenarios. You can't really guess them, but we'll go through the MMI and hopefully you'll see a demo of how it's done. And yeah, I think those are all the things I wanted to add to everyone else.
I just wanted to add
Amazing
one thing.
advice. Thank you, everyone. Oh, actually, no, go for it.
So I was gonna say, so Tista mentioned that there are some really straightforward questions, but I don't know if it's changed, but like I had a couple of crazy ones. So it's like not basically the thing is it's not that obvious. Like out of the seven stations that they've listed on our website, they will cover them, but sometimes it's hard to gauge because it's kind of a trippy question, like which station they're targeting in that sense. So I try and work on, just being aware of identifying, even if it's a bit abstract, what station they're trying to hit with the question, if that makes sense. So you can run back through your knowledge and say, okay, this seems to be a Breaking Bad news station. What things I have to mention spikes, I have to mention empathy, things like that. So sometimes they can be a bit abstract in the sense that they'll kind of um, mask what kind of topic they're trying to get at with the question. But I'd say one thing that's really important in the thinking time is to identify what it is so you can pull out all your keywords.
I think that was an amazing tip. And to clarify what I said, I probably should have said it better. But in terms of the quality-based sort of stations where you might need examples from your own experience, whether it's teamwork, leadership, they can be pretty standard, or your motivations could be pretty standard, but obviously might have changed since I've done them.
Okay, cool. We'll carry on then. Okay, so now we have two example MI questions. So we would like to request some volunteers from the chat who'd like to answer a question and get some feedback from us based on the question. Does
I
anybody want
really
to
recommend we
volunteer?
show them the question. I think it'll be a
Oh,
very brave volunteer who will sign up before
oh,
seeing the question. So,
okay, yeah, sure. This is the first question. And I guess for the rest of you that aren't like actually answering out loud, maybe just put in the chat how you might have approached this question too. But yeah.
and so have a minute to think about it, and then whoever's keen, just put your hand up using the Zoom function, and we'll pick someone in about a minute's time. So, okay, that seems like a very fast hand, but we'll give everyone a minute to think anyway. I think that's about a minute. Now, Amna, you were first by far, so let's have Amna give this a go.
Okay, so in this case, the ethical considerations are conflict of interest. So a patient giving you a gift basically might sort of collide with the quality of care you're providing and might affect the way you basically like might affect the dynamic of your interaction. So how I might approach Mrs. Jones, I will sort of try to explain to her. So it really depends on the nature of the gift. If it is if it is like a card or a chocolate, I might be allowed to accept the gift according to the regulations of my hospital or GP practice. However, if the gift is too expensive, I might not be allowed under those regulations. So it will be important for me to communicate that to Mrs. Johns in a very empathetic and compassionate way to ensure that she does not feel disheartened. So, and also for the third one, should doctors accept gifts from patients? I mean, in favor of this, I would say some patients are giving the gifts to sort of appreciate what you're doing for them. However, as I mentioned before, it can cause issues related to conflict of interest. So you should not. Yeah, that's about it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So I think on the whole, what we've had is a brilliant answer because kind of covered the both sides to this. So why you might want to take the gift and sort of what could be the potential impact on the doctor-patient relationship if you don't. So keeping her happy, showing the empathy side, kind of keeping the patient happy. And especially given that you've been having this conversation, having consultations with her for a few weeks. So you've got an established doctor-patient relationship. And so it's really good that you talked about kind of that side of things and keeping her happy, showing her empathy towards the situation. And what was also really good is that you recognized, I guess, what is the key aspect of this question. And that's they've only mentioned the words a gift. So they've not mentioned whether the gift is high value, what is the nature of the gift. And I guess the number one thing here is finding out what specifically is the nature of this gift and what does it mean. So, what would be kind of the downside of accepting a high value gift? Well, it would be really nice to refer that back to something like GMC Good Medical Practice. And you can say that I've been doing some reading and I saw that in GMC Good Medical Practice, it says that any gift you accept should not affect or be seen to affect the quality of care you provide to patients. So the key idea here, and you can link this back to question number 3, which is that if you accept any kind of high value gift, it could affect or it could be seen to affect the quality of care you provide. And it might be that even though you treat all your patients really well, the patient feels like the only reason you're being nice to them is because they've given you this amazing gift. Or that might be how other patients on the ward feel. So the key idea here is it really depends what the gift is. And do you think it's a big enough value to maybe be seen to affect, in this context, the quality of care that you provide? But on the whole, like I said, really good answer, balanced perspective. One thing to maybe have a think about, how are you going to divide up questions number 1, 2, and 3? So I would try and follow a sort of structure that I think, firstly, the kind of stuff I have to consider here. 1, what is the value of the gift? 2, how am I going to show empathy, the nature of the scenario? 3, GMC good medical practice, so on. Then you move on. Part 2, how I would approach Mrs. Jones with this in mind is X, Y, and Z. Then part 3, should doctors accept gifts from patients? It depends on so and so. Make sure you're actually addressing that you're answering part 1, 2, and 3. Because remember, someone's going to watch back this as a recording for your asynchronous interview, and you definitely want them to see that you've answered all 3 parts. And really good tip from Akshita in the chat, try and flow between the 3 of them, for sure. So any more feedback from you guys?
I've got some feedback. I would say, yeah, amazing, really good answer. And Ojas also gave some great feedback. I would say another thing is because they're saying ethical considerations, it would be nice to sort of, in some ways, make it a slightly broader point in the sense that, in terms of the ethical considerations, we need to consider whether this is fair at all. Not only could it affect my own judgment, it would bring up this idea of sort of justice, equality, equity, fairness. These are all keywords that I think Imperial likes mainly because it can sort of, I think it comes from the NHS Constitution and things like that. I would mention those sorts of words, and later on, you could try squeeze in the idea of deontological, I still cannot say that word, a deontological perspective, whether it's right or wrong to be accepting patients when you're supposed to treat them all equally and they're supposed to treat you equally. You can't play favorites between patients just because they've given you something. So that's another thing to consider, especially when they start saying ethical considerations. It would be good to sort of bring in the four pillars and whatnot. So yeah, brilliant.
Great. And Akshita, anything to add?
No, I think you guys have covered it pretty well. I think just generally when talking about gifts, it's important to just, emphasize the fact that you don't want to be biased, and have your judgment affected. I think that's the main thing.
I think one thing I would add, it's got here, how might you approach Mrs. Jones? So obviously approach her with empathy, approach it sensitively, explain to her the background, why you can't accept the gift if kind of it's high value. But definitely think about what are some alternatives. So when you're approaching her sensitively, kind of try and approach her with a practical solution. And what might that mean? So say there's a consultation for an elderly patient. Well, think about what she's being treated for. Has she, I don't know, been recently diagnosed with cancer? Is there a cancer charity that you could propose? Are there any guidelines based on your GP practice, or if it's a hospital, then your hospital trust? Sort of, is there a hospital charity that they can donate to instead? And I just see Hardeep in the chat, you've mentioned that exactly. So donating to the hospital, these kind of things. So don't just turn her down. Make sure you recognize where you're coming from. Tell her that you really, really appreciate the sentiment. This is why you can't take the gift, but this is what we could maybe propose instead. And maybe acknowledge the fact that it's not just you treating the elderly patient. In the GP practice, you've got a multidisciplinary team. So, kind of within the GP practice and outside, there are a lot of people involved in caring for this patient. It's not just that one GP. And so, by accepting the gift on behalf of the practice as a whole, you're acknowledging the fact that it's not just you treating in isolation and not just you deserving recognition. Yeah, Kieran, go for it.
Just one last thing as well. I think Imperial really likes it when you kind of embed the context of the question into your answer. So maybe considering the fact that, for example, in this case, that it's an elderly patient, and considering kind of the motive behind the gift. So, for example, does it mask kind of a wider concern? So, for example, is it to do with loneliness, or is it an ulterior motive for trying to get ahead on the waiting list, for example? So I think that's another really good advice for scenario-based questions. Embed the context of the question into your answer to try to get a higher score. I think is good to do.
Amazing. And I guess the other thing, I know Tista talks about this idea of deontology or like deontological ethics. And so do people have an idea what is the meaning of this? So when we have deontology and compared to something like, say, utilitarianism. So does anyone have any ideas? Put them in the chat. What might be the difference between these stances? So what do they mean? So I'll put the keyword in the chat, deontology. And I guess comparing to something like utilitarianism. So kind of this is what Tista mentioned. Are we happy with what that means? Yeah, so we've got really good points here. So with deontology, the idea is kind of that we've got certain duty-based ethics. So there are certain fixed moral rules that you always have to follow, irrespective of the results. So like a deontological ethical view would be saying something like, killing is wrong, lying is wrong. And what you're going to say is that these are kind of fixed moral values, and these are always going to be applicable. So there's no flexibility. Kind of, it doesn't depend on the outcome. These are your fixed moral principles. And so someone could argue that, for example, from a deontological ethical stance, we could say that accepting high value gifts is altogether wrong. And that was kind of what Tista was saying, that in this case, if we have kind of a deontological perspective on this, the ethical consideration here is that accepting high value gifts is altogether wrong because it can change the way that, say, patient-doctor relationships exist. And in contrast, we've got this idea of utilitarianism. So utilitarianism is all about the idea that the outcome is what matters. So the outcome kind of justifies the means, the ends justify the means, and what you're trying to do is maximize good for all people in the long run. And so you could say that we could also take a utilitarian perspective here. And in that case, we have to balance the potential harm of taking the gift from the patient, how that could affect the doctor-patient relationship, with the potential benefit we're going to have from keeping the patient happy. And so you could recognize kind of those two different ethical stances, and that would then kind of address ethical considerations. And Zain, a good point in the chat, caring about consequences is consequentialism. Yes. So utilitarianism is kind of a specific example of this theory of consequentialism. So let's not spend too long here, Kieran. I'll let you go on to the next question.
Yeah, maybe we should just carry on, and then if we have time at the end, come back.
Yeah, I like that idea. We'll come back to the next one of this.
Make sure we go for like why. Yeah. Okay. So I guess this is just generalized advice for like if when questions ask like why would you apply to this university, the way that I personally structured it when I did my interviews, I would say there are three main reasons why I applied to this university. The first reason is about the course structure, the second one is about extracurriculars, and the third one is about location. Obviously there's different approaches, but that's kind of how I generally structure my answer, so you could adopt that as well. And now we'll go through like why you would apply to Imperial specifically. Oh wait, sorry, I lied. We're going to go through the course structure first. So I guess in Imperial, the course is 6 years long. So they call them phases now rather than years. But for phase 1 and phase 1A and phase 1B, we have year 1 and year 2. So in those, you do kind of like your core kind of science modules. So POM is kind of like a biochemistry-based module. BRS is about like your systems like cardiology, respiratory, things like that. MAP is like about like lifestyle medicine. PCH is about placement. CSI is kind of a case-based learning module, and the CPA is a clinical skills exam. And then in year 1, you cover the anatomy of kind of head, neck, and spine and thorax. And in year 2, I'm currently learning about the anatomy of the abdomen, pelvis, and peritoneum, and also we're starting limbs as well. And then in year 1, you get very early GP placement. So we have an 8-week GP placement and 2-week hospital placements. And then in year 2, it's basically the same, but instead you have 2 times 2-week hospital placements. And maybe Tessa can tell us more about phase 1C, which is year 3, because she's currently in year 3. So yeah.
So just before we do that, I think worth bringing this back definitely to the idea of interviews. So everything here, 100% really, really good stuff to mention. And the way that you have to kind of link this back is to think about what are you going to get out of a course that is structured like this versus something different, and why that makes you want to study at Imperial. So let's take a look at what we can see here. For example, we've got in year 1, you get an 8-week GP placement and a 2-week hospital placement. So if I compare that to say what I do at Oxford, I don't really see patients until I get onto my clinical years. So years 4, 5, and 6. And so when you're getting on hospital placements kind of in your very first year, spending 2 weeks there, you need to link that back to you as a person and kind of your personal development. So why is that something that really matters to you? Well, maybe because what really appeals about medicine to you is the human side of things and kind of interacting with lots of different sorts of people, communication skills, meeting different patients. And that's why the fact that studying at Imperial, where I'm going to get patient contact from the very first year, really appeals to me. And you could say that I think that's going to be good for me as a future doctor because I get to develop history taking, communication skills from a really, really early stage. So that could be a good point to raise. We've also got here phase 2, the intercalated BSc year. So you get to do, and Tista's talking about this on the chat, an extra degree as part of your 6 years. And that's a compulsory part of the course. So everyone does this. And you do this extra degree kind of in between your phase 1 and your phase 3. So after you've finished kind of the more preclinical side of medicine, and you get to kind of explore one particular field in a lot of detail. And there are a lot of options. I think they're being shared on the chat right now. But you can do stuff like, say, management, or you can learn something like bioengineering, or you can learn a specific area, which is not necessarily like 100% clinical medicine, in a little bit more detail. And you might get to do some experience with research, and you could link that back if you're interested in research to Imperial being a university that's very much renowned for that. And so kind of, Tista, any thoughts to add on this, especially the BSc side?
So I'm in year 3. I am in the process of looking at BSc options. I will say management at Imperial is quite famous in the sense a lot of students from outside of Imperial come to Imperial just to do the management degree. There's also a huge trend of medical students looking at management at Imperial just to potentially level up their skills for sort of more admin based things like clinical director, things like that, or even running a GP practice. So those are just very useful things, and Imperial just has that kind of network going that just makes it really the place to be for management. In terms of year three, I think Karen mentioned that I might need to talk about that. Year three is really enjoyable. That's the first time you get to do 8-week placements. So I'm aware on the side it says 8-week GP placement for first year and second year. It's worth noting that basically means you go to the GP once a fortnight for 8 weeks. As opposed to me, I am on the ward for 8 weeks from 7 a.m. to potentially 6 p.m. Sometimes I stay later if it's interesting. But it's just really fun. And the main thing is, oh my goodness, Imperial is so famous for its clinicals, and I didn't realize that until I am now in third year. You get to be with one of the best. Oh, today we got a lecture from one of the best neurosurgeons. And it's just crazy. You just have specialists at the fingertips, and you can ask them all sorts of dumb questions that you definitely cannot when you're, high level. So yeah, Imperial's really the place to be for clinicals.
If let's see, you have any other? Oh, actually, I go for it.
I think one thing that I didn't really know about Imperial before coming is how integrated they make everything. So, they call it integrated course, but I think what's really unique is that you do a bit of everything at the same time. So you have so many different learning opportunities, and it's such a huge variety that like no 2 weeks are the same, and it keeps things really interesting. So, for example, you'll be in a lecture in the morning, and then the next day you'll go and study the same thing that you saw in the lecture on like a cadaver that's already been dissected for you. And you're in groups all the time. There's so much teamwork. It's all really collaborative. You can bounce ideas off everyone. And then we have tutorials, we have CSI, as Kieran mentioned. So essentially, that's like integrating lifestyle aspects and then like your scientific aspects and putting in the context of like cases of imaginary people. And then some of your exams are also group based. So it's so collaborative, and it's just such a, pleasant environment to be in because everyone's working together all the time. And you can put this in the context of medicine in your interview and say that it really sets you up well for working at MDT and, getting used to working with lots of different people, different types of people. And yeah, just being in that environment where you're always in a team and how is very similar to how it is in medicine. And then yeah, GP placement is super, super early. So you start in like October of your first year, and then you have GP placement once every 2 weeks. And obviously, if you really got into medicine because of the whole patient contact thing, you can say how that really interests you. And a lot of our GP placements are like in London, so you can say that potentially, I mean, this goes for all of the hospital placements as well. I think most of them, like Imperial's NHS Trust, is mainly in West London, and a lot of those areas are really diverse. So one thing that I think I mentioned in my interview and I found really interesting was that because of the diversity, there's a lot of influence of like lifestyle factors, cultural factors, socioeconomic factors on the way that diseases are presented and the types of diseases that come in. And that really does show through in like the cases that we see at GP and stuff. So I think that's a point that is quite interesting to make when you're either talking about why Imperial or the course and like the location of GP practices and hospitals and the kind of demographic that you encounter when you're on placement. So, yeah.
Cool. I guess we'll just carry on then. Unless anyone has anything else they want to add, but I think we covered quite a lot there. So I guess these are just some reasons that I like from my interview notes when I applied to Imperial. These are kind of things that I would have mentioned in my answer. So obviously we have, as you kind of alluded to, that very integrated course. We have lots of like it's a blend of that traditional, but also that kind of element of group work and case-based learning. As obviously you're learning through a variety of many different mediums, and also like as Tita kind of alluded to, you're learning from kind of the world leading experts. So for example, when you have a lecture, it's the person that wrote the textbook, for example. So it's these world leading experts. Obviously we have the early clinical placements, we have integration, and with integration in your answers, I would recommend kind of linking that to a specific kind of, usually typically you'll develop kind of a niche. So for me, it's one that was interested in Alzheimer's disease. So I'll be like, I'm really interested in Alzheimer's disease and I've done this research into it. And that was the reason why potentially I'm interested right now in pursuing the neuroscience and mental health BSc, for example. So just tailor that towards your interests. They're always trying to, as it is like university, trying to change the course, getting a lot of feedback from students and integrating new technologies into the course. It has the most reciters out of any UK university, so you can mention that too. I think another good point as well is to mention like cultural societies. So maybe if you want to learn about more about your own culture or even learn about new ones. There's also a module called Imperial Horizons, which is where you're kind of encouraged to do kind of another aspect that isn't kind of the core sciences. So for example, you can like learn language, entrepreneurship. At the moment, I'm doing a coding module for my kind of I Explore Horizons option. So you can talk about those. There's an enterprise hub, you can make your own business. There's lots of like opportunities to do charity work at homeless shelters, soup kitchens. There's a society called Teddy Bear Hospital where you kind of go into primary schools and give them advice on try to help reduce their health anxiety. So you can talk about those different elements in your answer to explain why you want to go to Imperial. Just make sure that you make it kind of personalized and linked to your own kind of quality skills and experiences. But I'm not sure if anyone else has any reasons why they applied to Imperial too. But yeah.
I just wanted to add, so we've talked about kind of the course structure. Now, a lot of these words get thrown around on like university websites that we do case-based learning, we do an integrated course, we do a traditional course. I feel like a lot of students, they don't really know what that means. So I guess the idea of sort of an integrated course or like a spiral curriculum that you see on the Imperial website. So I kind of give my take on what that means. And I mean, the Imperial students here can give their perspective on how they found it as a learning experience. But I guess the idea behind that is you don't kind of just learn the basic science and the healthy person and then stop. And then next year, you go back to the same context once you've forgotten everything. And then you learn about kind of how the organ goes wrong. So it's not that kind of year one, you learn about cells, year two, you learn about kind of organs, and year three, you learn about organs go wrong. The idea of kind of your integrated course or a spiral based curriculum is you try and learn about that stuff in some form together. And so, I mean, you guys can come back to this in a second, but sort of you're trying to bring together the pathology or where stuff can go wrong a little bit more closely with when you're learning the preclinical stuff. And so you're learning about things like cells, organs, really basic ideas. And so, for example, if you hear about anatomy, and kind of like what is the structure of the human body, in the same context, you're trying to learn a little bit more about the medical side of it as well and how that applies to being a clinician. And then we've got this idea of case-based learning. So I guess by case-based learning, what we're saying is that if we learn about a certain condition or a certain problem, we try and see that in the context of an example. So they might give you an example of a certain patient, of a certain case where something has gone wrong. And that means you can apply your learning in a little bit more of a practical context. And so you can refer that back to yourself as a person and why a course like this would appeal to you. So you really want to do a course where you see things in a practical context and with the case-based learning side of things, that really appeals to you because you can understand sort of what this sort of condition or what this illness would look like in an actual patient. And yeah, Kieran, anything to add on that? Or Tisa?
I just wanted to quickly say, in summary, what that actually means, a spiral-based curriculum. If you didn't understand something in first year, they'll revisit it in second year. And that means you're not, fully falling behind. You can just keep asking them first year things as well. They'll explain it and then make second year make sense. And now that I'm in third year, we see the similar things, but in like a clinical context, actually trying to, do differential diagnoses and everything. So that means you're never truly left behind. They keep coming back to similar things.
Linking back your knowledge. So it's like it's cross-curricular learning almost.
And I'd say that as well, like what Imperial do with the timetable is like when you learn about, for example, say if you learn about diabetes, at the same time you learn about the pharmacology of diabetes, and at the same time there'll be a case that relates to diabetes. So you're kind of like really compounding your knowledge and kind of becoming kind of a mini expert on that specific kind of area of medicine. So yeah.
I would say Imperial is consistently ranked for sort of organization of the medical curriculum. And it really comes through. Everything is so well organized. I'm always like, this is actually pretty great. And another thing about why Imperial, now that I'm older, I'm really realizing the network of Imperial. This is not just the medical network. I'm talking about the management network, which is quite big, and all the sort of leadership positions, like the biggest leadership positions nationally, internationally, probably have people there. And people are just so helpful that you can just email them and hopefully they'll do a quick coffee chat with you. It's just all about network, basically. So yeah.
Let's move forwards then.
Yeah.
What else have we got?
So again, these are just some examples of society. So we've got oncology society, medtech society, coalition society. There's a wide array. And what I did is on Imperial, they have this thing called the A to Z. So if you Google Imperial A to Z societies, it will list like every society that the Imperial has from A to Z. And I just found the ones that aligned with my interests just to reference in my interview. So I'd recommend that you guys do that as well. But these are just some examples that you could mention if you're interested in oncology, coding, for example. But yeah, we'll keep going. And then again, obviously, as we kind of alluded to, Imperial is kind of at the cutting edge of research that's really kind of propelling the field of medicine forward. So we just found some examples that you guys reference as well. And again, I'd really recommend tying this into your particular niche that you have. So if you're really interested in diabetes, you should reference this, for example, or maybe try and find some research that Imperial's done that aligns with your particular interests. And then you can link that to the interplacy BSc and kind of your desire to be a part of research, if that makes sense. So this is about AI in helping predict types of diabetes. Again, I would just like read the article, maybe make a little bit of notes on it and what you found interesting and why that interested you, and then you can just reference it briefly in your interview. But don't like get too bogged down like the core science behind like how the system works. Just be aware that it exists. If that makes sense. Like, they don't want you to be an expert. They just want you to see that you've kind of done a bit of research into what Imperial is getting up to. Basically, is what I'd say.
I think
Yeah,
I just want to add something that I think is quite effective at interviews. If you find something research-wise that either links to something that you've seen at work experience or something that you've seen at volunteering or something that you've investigated, you can see that, you saw something, you were interested by it, and then you went above and beyond to look further into it. I think that looks pretty good. So they know that you're exploring your passions. And obviously, if it's Imperial research, it's just the cherry on top. So being able to link it all together just kind of makes it a bit more seamless and it doesn't seem like you're just throwing in some research for the fun of it. So if you can find something relevant to experience that you've had, it would be really good. And I think there was a question in the chat, I don't know if it's been answered, where you can find research. They have, I think, like a news sort of website where you can find
Share the link afterwards.
articles.
We'll
Yeah.
share the link with them.
So yeah, loads of research there. So you can find something that's relevant.
I would also just quickly add that Imperial starts you off on the research journey pretty soon, and you can always just ask for research opportunities. You just go up to one of the biggest lecturers and whatever field, and you're like, I'm interested, and you just email them, and they might give you something. People have got things published in first year, second year. That's quite early, but these things happen, and that's because of Imperial.
I think that's really important, right? When you talk about research, make sure you're always linking it back to you. So exactly like Akshita said, why this particular research? So kind of I'm really interested in, say, neuroscience. I'm really interested in cancer. And I found that Imperial is a leading center for so and so because I saw this specific article. So for example, I found this AI that's been designed to predict type 2 diabetes from ECGs. And I think that's brilliant because kind of endocrinology is an area I'm really interested in. And sort of I have a family member who deals with type 2 diabetes. I know what a big impact kind of having to inject insulin multiple times a day can have. And I see how promising this sort of research could be. And as an undergraduate at Imperial, I would really like to get involved in this sort of thing. And I know that there are many opportunities for me to do so. For example, the intercalated BSc opportunity, doing whatever, find the right BSc. For example, kind of just going up to lecturers, and I would love to kind of potentially find research opportunities through doing that. I know there's a program called like UROPs, whatever that stands for, where kind of Imperial students can sign up to summer research projects and so on.
Yeah.
And I think with research as well, something that just like adding on to that, if you have research that you're interested in, thinking about how can that be integrated into clinical practice and how will that actually improve patient care as a whole, instead of just saying, okay, that's handy. Well, if the AI can predict type 2 diabetes, then how will that mean that people are being diagnosed earlier? What repercussions will that have? And just generally, how will it either ease pressure on the NHS or improve people's, experience with the disease? So thinking about the clinical repercussions or the ways that will impact patients directly and how it'll be integrated into clinical practice, I think is really important with research as well.
Mhm. And in terms of insider sort of common things that we see, I don't know if I'm sure in first and second year these guys have heard about kisspeptin. Like I don't know, there's a huge obsession with kisspeptin, this molecule at Imperial, because I think they found it. So if you ever want to say that, oh, I know they're a leading research university, they find things, talk about kisspeptin. You guys should be able to find that. So yeah.
Cool, let's move forwards then. So I think we've got
Yeah.
some other research examples too that we can briefly show you, Kieran.
Yeah, so we have this one on the left, which is about DMT, which is like a very potent psychedelic. So it's about advanced brain imaging and how that psychedelic alters a person's perception of reality. And then also one about the role of antibiotics in preventing drug-resistant tuberculosis in children. Again, just linked to how this might translate into clinical practice. So yeah, again, maybe just in your own time research into these, but just in the interest of time, we'll just keep going forward. So again, so this could be referenced to, so about the type of anatomy teaching. So roughly in like at university, there'll be basically three types of anatomy teaching. So the first one is dissection, and that's where you kind of actually kind of cut the specimens yourself more physically with your hands, and that kind of gives you a more kind of immersive experience with kind of a strong anatomical depth and spatial awareness, and it will enhance kind of your manual dexterity, and that might be useful if you have kind of a specific interest in surgery, but it just does a disadvantage. It takes a lot of time. And then we have prosection, which is what Imperial uses, which is where you kind of have these pre-dissected specimens that you're allowed to observe, and you more kind of try and identify specific kind of key structures that are related to the anatomy of that particular region that you're learning about. And that can be useful, for example, for neurological structures. And then as well at Imperial, we have a little bit of virtual anatomy, which is used to kind of just supplement you and give you a bit of background before you see the actual specimen. And with that, you kind of see kind of 3D online models and virtual resources that kind of allow you to like twist the model of the body around and witness it from all the different kind of angles. And that allows you, again, it's quite useful for revision, to like allow you to kind of repeat and like look at it from multiple different angles as well. So for Imperial, just to emphasize, we typically use more of a prosection and combined with virtual anatomy approach. So yeah, I don't know if anyone has any other insights that they wanted to add to.
Remember to link it back. So kind of you're going to a university that does prosection. You need to talk about kind of how prosection really appeals to you. And like this isn't the number one most important thing to mention, but if you do refer to it, then make sure you say that kind of prosection means we get to see kind of pre-dissected specimens and get explained by experts exactly what's going on. So you're not just going in there with a scalpel, no clue, cutting left, right, and center. You're being shown by an expert, this is exactly what you need to know. It's been cut perfectly. It's showing exactly what you need to be shown. And so kind of it's a really good, accessible way of seeing things. And I guess the alternative is if you're going to a dissection university, then talk about how you get to kind of develop your surgical skills and so on. So it depends what uni you're going to.
Yeah, cool. Again, this is just like I found an excerpt of like one of my a timetable from first year. So there's as actually probably to tell you more about. There's a lot of like 9 to 5. It's very lecture intensive, especially in the first 2 years. So obviously that does lead to, in the summer terms when it's exam season, a lot of time spent in the library, unfortunately. But I feel like it's, if you kind of feel like you have a mindset where you kind of want to be really intellectually stimulated, I feel like every day I go to university, I learn something new and kind of push my brain. And I feel like as I'm progressing through the course, I can see kind of like an evolution in myself, in like my kind of like ability, like I can see myself becoming a good doctor, if that makes sense, as I'm progressing through the course. So I guess just be aware that if you do go to Imperial, there is like a lot of work involved, but obviously we'll talk about like all the other fun stuff that you can do too. But I don't know if the others have any other insights too about like their experience academic wise.
I'd say especially in first year, like they do ease you into it because while there is a lot of content and while there is so much going on, I feel like just everyone being in the same boat and being always in that team environment means that obviously you know that not everyone is going to be 100% on top of everything and going above and beyond, and it just keeps things a bit more real, so you don't end up stressing by yourself like, oh my gosh, I'm so behind, etc., because there is so much content. And I think one of the keys to actually being able to keep on top of things is not trying to learn everything, but just picking out the main things, because lectures, they're long and there's a lot of information covered, but it's just about making the most of your time. Imperial have this really good note bank where the oldies put their notes on it, and then you can use their Anki sets and their like notions, and it's all very useful because they've actually abstracted what is important information. So if you make the most of your resources, you collaborate with your peers, you make the most of your time, and keep your work-life balance going, engage in societies, engage in everything that's going on around you, then I think it becomes a lot easier to settle in, because then you build this support system, you build this sort of experience that works for you. And that means that you're able to, focus on academics when you need to, while also being able to relax and refresh yourself, in order to enable you to carry on working for the rest of the 6 years. So especially in first term, there's a lot going on. It can be quite overwhelming socially for some people, just because you kind of have to decide like what to prioritize. But I think that's also an important learning experience. So don't stress about like having 9 to 5s, because it's just it's different to school, but that can be exciting, especially if you thrive in that sort of variety, busy lifestyle. So it takes some getting used to, but it is very fun.
Right, let's move forward then. Unless, oh, Tista, yeah, what were you gonna say?
All I was going to say is ultimately every year people get through it. And if it's any comfort to you guys, the pass marks are achievable, let's just say. So I think they're about like mid 50s or something. And resitting is something that, the university always understands. And let's see how it go, basically. So yeah, don't worry about
Please
it.
don't use that to answer why Imperial. That the
Yeah,
university shift towards researchers. Don't say that.
yeah, no, obviously, Imperial still, has great quality teaching. Doctors that come out from Imperial are great. But basically, for those who are quite scared in the chat, things are manageable and achievable.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Again, this is just a little scratch. Like, obviously, like there's so much time for fun. Basically, like last summer I went with part of my friends. I went on hiking trips. went to firework shows. There's time for lots of fun. And I feel like it's just about getting that kind of perfect balance of kind of the academics and also the kind of fun social life. So I don't know if the others have any want to mention any societies that they're part of and things like that. But I personally like do taekwondo. Been on like hikes. I also like a lot of like medical education stuff like that. So there's opportunity to join loads of different societies basically. So and there's always time for fun, and there's the committee always organises loads of fun events throughout the year that you can get involved with too. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
And each year you can try out something new. Last year I did archery. This year I tried out rifling and doing a show and whatnot. There's lots and lots and lots to do. Those 300 clubs are very active.
And I think another thing to mention is that ICSM, like Imperial College School of Medicine, have their own sports societies. So if you like that sort of community vibe where the medical school is a little bit more separate from the rest of the university, then if that's something that appeals to you, then that's good because they have their own sports societies. And as we mentioned, the academic societies, they're like all the specialties have one. And they do offer a lot of support as well in like actual academic stuff. So they give you tutorials for when it getting close to exams and revision notes. And in terms of what I do, I represented Imperial in a dance team in first term, and I'm part of medics cricket. And yeah, my friends do a lot of other different societies as well, like music and other things. So yeah. And also in a com, like in your halls, they run events as well. So you get to know people from other courses as well. So lots going on.
Yeah, cool. We'll just keep going then. Again, just I wanted to talk about finances a little bit, just to kind of make you aware of the different options that are available. Obviously, in London, it is not even quite, it's quite very expensive to live and be a student in London, but there are obviously ways that you can kind of mitigate this. So the first one is obviously you'll have your Student Finance England loan. And then obviously as well, Imperial has this really good kind of bursary scheme called the Imperial Bursary, and you can get up to £5,000 per year. And this is kind of a means tested bursary based on your household income. So that's just kind of a little extra bit of support that kind of can support you in funding life at Imperial. As well, based on your performance in the kind of interview and admissions process, you can also get an academic scholarship too, which can also help you to fund your experience at Imperial. And you have to write an essay as well for that. There might be other wider academic scholarships that are available. So, for example, I know that Zero Gravity offer a scholarship for people as well. So you could maybe get involved with that program too. Again, as well, in exams, there's monetary prizes for kind of good academic performances. And you can also have side hustles, for example, working as a tutor or even working for Imperial as kind of an outreach ambassador or a welcome ambassador, something like that. So there's always like ways to kind of support yourself. And I wouldn't like let finances be a barrier. Like I think when I got accepted to Imperial, I was really nervous to kind of accept my offer because of the like being able to fund it. But I feel like don't let finances be a barrier to you and just kind of go for it. And there's always support for you. For example, there's a hardship bursary if you're really struggling with finances as well. That's kind of what I'd say from a financial point. I'm not sure about the others' experience too, but yeah.
I would also quickly add the hardship bursary is non-means tested. So for example, even though the household income is, might not qualify you for like the proper big bursaries, you can still apply. And also in terms of scholarships, I think they keep having new ones. So I'm part of the Law Scholarship and I got £3,000 per summer. That's 2 summers. So these things can be pretty generous, if you look for them, basically.
Yeah. Actually, did you have anything else to add, or is that what you think? That's all okay? Cool.
Sorry,
Okay.
were you asking me, or was that me?
No. Actually, that's fine. Okay. And then I guess just quickly, we could like a little short kind of 5-minute Q&A, just if anyone wants to put any questions in the chat, and then we can answer your questions. Hopefully.
Amazing. So I know we got to sort of the end of things here. So if anyone does feel the need to go now that it's 7, absolutely feel free to do so. But yeah, we'll stick around for any questions. And equally, if any tutors need to go, then also feel free. But if you'd like to stay and answer some questions, that's super welcome. So yeah, Al-Hassan, where will the slides and recording be uploaded? I will let you guys know, probably YouTube for the recording and WhatsApp chats for the slides. I'll read them out then maybe. John, how do you balance the preparation need to do for A levels and the extra research you need to do for your med school admissions for someone in year 12? Kieran, you're
Okay.
unmuted.
Oh, yeah, sure. What I would say is with the extra reading, it should never be kind of laborious. Like it shouldn't be kind of really like a lot of effort. I feel like if you're following your niche and your path, it should be in a way, not to be a nerd, but like kind of an enjoyable experience. So I feel like just maybe every day, maybe on the way to school or like after school, if you get a time, just like research into a bit of things, something that interests you, maybe based on a work experience case that you've seen, and just kind of try and build upon your kind of experiences. So if you learn about one thing, then that leads you to another thing. I think they kind of like it if you kind of like stack your experiences and just make like a massive Google Doc and call it like interview research, and then just like put all your research into there. And then by the time you get to year 13, you'll have a good kind of solid bank of what's going on in the field of medicine, is what I'd say. So yeah.
Just to answer that, I think one of my main takeaways from my application experience is like I would focus much more on my exam, i.e. the UCAT, or I think it's UCAT now. Yeah, it's UCAT. Crazy. But yeah, I would focus on that heavily because that dictates a lot of your application process. And I wish I focused less on extracurriculars and more on my exams. And that's such a common mistake. You might be the president of XYZ society, but if the exam score um is like might not be up to par, then that's just really that just feels like very disheartening. So I would definitely focus on your actual UCAT, BMAT equivalent, whatever exam that you have. Um, A levels wise. I would do questions from the start. And since after my fake GCSEs, I did the fake GCSEs because I was COVID year. But after that, I realized that I'm just going to do questions from the get-go. At that point, I was not really memorizing content. I just did questions and then everything just fell into place. Just do the questions from the start. Doesn't matter if you're getting 30%, you'll end up getting 80, whatever, later on at the end of year 13. And in terms of extra reading, I would say, yeah, it shouldn't be laborious, but if you don't have your niche yet, and I, as a third year, do not have my, passion yet, I just enjoy most things, then just sort of ask questions in class, like why does X happen? And then just find out why X happens. Sometimes your teachers might not have those answers. I would also say those challenges, like maths challenge or like chemistry challenge, you don't have to do well in them at all. But even those challenges sometimes show like an interesting part of science, basically, and you can always look at that. And if you're really brave, you could just email like staff from universities and be like, oh, hi, can I just shadow you over the summer? I wish I did these things. I wish I knew these things. But yeah, you can just do that and that'll be quite enough, really.
It's really good advice. Thank you so much. I think just to emphasize that point, as we've got a lot of year 12s in the chat and they're asking questions about UCAT and stuff now, be really, really sort of pragmatic, be practical with this. So the medical application process is designed to be objective and fair. What that means for stuff like calling people to interview, they tend to use a combination of two things. Can vary by university what they focus on. Like at MyUCAT, we're very, very big on strategic applications. And if one of you guys, Akshita, maybe you can share the link in the chat while I'm talking about this. But sort of the idea is all the universities for calling to interview, they're gonna generally use some combination of UCAT, UCAT plus GCSE, just UCAT, some of these things. And most cases, the UCAT is going to be pretty heavy. So in terms of what's going to decide who gets to interview, it's not how many extracurriculars you've got in your personal statement. It's not how many doctors you've shadowed or how many books you've read. It is just going to be your UCAT score, as kind of the people from Imperial now know. And if your UCAT isn't so high, then you can apply to universities that care about other objective things. But in most cases, that will then be your GCSE. So very, very few, like this year it was just Keel and some of the private ones, are actually going to care about personal statement and those sorts of things. So if you don't have kind of those doctor connections, you've not got work experience in the hospital, that's really nothing to worry about. No one is kind of counting the quantity of experiences you've done or like how much time you've spent doing extracurriculars, really not a big deal. Once you get to your interview, as you can see, the majority of the questions are pretty objective, scenario based. Stuff like why medicine, why this uni, give an example of when you demonstrated teamwork. You can use lots of different kind of examples to demonstrate that. They don't have to be in the hospital. So if you're giving an example of, say, teamwork, it could be literally anything. So don't worry if you don't have the most high-powered extracurriculars. That is 100% completely fine. And it's not so much about what you've done when it gets to interview, but what you've learned. So the key idea is kind of how can you reflect on your experiences? How can you show from each experience what did you take home? What did you understand? And kind of, I always like to refer back to this example that back when I was applying, they mentioned at one of the university open days. And it was of two students. There was one who had kind of shadowed a neurosurgery in the hospital, and they had written this on their personal statement. And there was another who had been working at their local Sainsbury's. And both of them were asked about this at interview. It was mentioned on their personal statement. The one who had done the neurosurgery had nothing to say about it, nothing to reflect. Clearly, they had got there through nepotism, and well, they weren't that interested in the field. The one who had kind of worked at their local Sainsbury's, they had a lot to say about linking it back to medicine and their personal development. So they talked about how sort of they had dealt with all kinds of different customers, developed teamwork skills, developed communication skills, and they even referred to like in one instance they had to deal with shoplifters, and that helped them deal with challenging situations, very similar to how you might need to de-escalate situations as a doctor. So the key thing here is that person got in, the other person didn't, neurosurgery one. The key thing here is it's all about reflecting on your experiences, what you learned, and why they make you a good candidate. It's not about what you've done and what you've seen. So focus on your admissions tests and people saying, when should we start for the UCAT? So this is controversial. I would say kind of minimum, like the UCAT website says, 6 to 8 weeks. Probably better if you err on the side of 8. So like as much of summer as you can. But if you want to start a little bit earlier with free resources, so like go on the UCAT website, find out what you're gonna expect, find out what the different sorts of question types are, and kind of a little and often do like 5 minutes every night, check out what the different sorts of questions are. There are not that many subsections this year. That's not going to cause you any harm. And kind of people throw around the suggestion of burnout. Generally speaking, people are going to burn out when they try and cram, they do hours and hours a day, they're doing like 10 mocks, 5 mocks a week. That's probably getting to too much. If you spend like 5 minutes a night from now, whenever you have some time, know what to expect, that means your chances of burnout are going to reduce massively. So I would say like use the free UCAT website, know what to expect, check it out now, and then spend the majority of your summer after mocks actually doing focus preparation. And that should be enough. Right,
I
let's
think
answer some Imperial questions. So do Imperial normally do role plays?
I was gonna say for the role plays question, I think that I don't know. I don't know if I'm allowed to say, but
Let's
generally
not
they
answer
kind
that.
of okay.
In general, a lot of medical schools do role plays, and if there is anything on the website suggesting that they might deal with something like breaking bad news or that kind of situational question where it's empathy, where it's asking communication, it might be quite likely that there's going to be a role play for any medical school, generally speaking. So, kind of, no one can say that there is or isn't going to be a role play. Kind of, they can change each year. But it would be a good idea, generally speaking, to prepare kind of role play skills if you're seeing stuff like communication, breaking bad news, that kind of thing mentioned on the website.
So just like generally like thinking about Breaking Bad News, thinking about how you would potentially differentiate between breaking bad news to a friend, breaking bad news to someone at the hospital, what things to take into consideration, like the setting, empathy, pauses, body language, eye contact. Whether you have that in a role play setting or whether you have that in a more general setting where explaining how you would do it, it doesn't really matter. It's just kind of the concept of your communication and how you would come across to that person. So I think whether you're acting it yourself or you're just explaining hypothetically how you would do it, it's the same sort of principle. And also, if you're practicing for other interviews that definitely have role play, and they say that they will, then you'll have practiced that. And if Imperial decide to put it in this year, and they may not, they may do, then you'll be prepared regardless. So, yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I also saw is about like repeating ideas. One thing that I always used to do in MMIs particularly would be like learn like not many examples. So I had like 3 main examples, but I just learned them in a lot of detail. And then from station to station, I'll just repeat the same like scenario and the same story every time because every station is independent of each other. They'll all have a different marker. So as a result, you can kind of repeat ideas from station to station. And that's something that I actually recommend because it just reduces the load that's placed on your like brain to have to remember. Because obviously you're remembering a lot of information. So just try and learn like you can repeat ideas from station to station basically is what I wanted to say. Yeah.
And also just to add, I think Oja said that it's what you learn from the situation. I would also add and say how you say it is what matters the most. I mean, you can say anything you want, basically, if you know how to say it properly. You can just spin things. You know, I'm I'm not gonna swear or anything, but BSing is like quite you can do it, you can spin it, and you can do it well, and that will still show the lessons of what you've learned properly. And that neurosurgeon person, I feel quite sad for them because they at least should have learned something from that. But anyway, another thing I
Important
want.
MyUCAT disclaimer. What we are suggesting is that you phrase things in the best way possible. So, sort of, if you've done an experience, actually pick out your skills and present them as favorably as possible. Kind of, if you were doing a leadership role, say that you were leading the team, so on. What we're not encouraging is that you lie about stuff. And kind of, if you do lie about stuff, it can be pretty obvious, kind of from the interviewer's perspective. Especially something like if you have that neurosurgery example and you've got nothing to say, like easily you could have said so much. What was the surgical intricacy that really impressed you? You saw the multidisciplinary team of neurosurgeon, anesthetist, nurses, all working together, all looking out for the patient interest. You saw the communication before the surgery, kind of reassuring the worried patient. Was the patient awake during the surgery? For some of them, they are. Did someone hold their hand, kind of encourage them through the process? Always check how they're doing. There's so much you could have said. So the key thing is find examples, what you can talk about.
Yeah, just to say, when I say you can spin anything, I meant more in the sense online work experience. That's pretty much all I had. And people were so worried about online work experience, it does not count, da 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 da. It definitely counts. You can just say, so even though it was online, it was amazing. They had this whole resus situation going on, with simulated patients and the way I sort of said it was, it was an MDT situation. It really showed leadership because in a resus situation, which is resuscitation, someone's about to die basically, you need a leader to coordinate everything. They just stand at the foot of the bed and sort of tell orders. They're always checking on everything because everyone is so focused in their role that they need a leader basically. So that's how you can spin it. It's all about leadership, teamwork, coordination. It's all those keywords. And one last thing I want to say, not about this specific question, but as a reassurance to everyone, I thought I basically failed my asynchronous interview. Like I was heartbroken for 3 weeks. I was like, that's it. I've ruined every chance of doing anything in life. But anyway, what I did the next time was really practice 1 minute per question. Please do that. Please, please, please do that. And then luckily, I guess the second one brought me up. And yeah, and they give you feedback as well. That's always interesting. People can always reapply the next year if you're going to take a gap year. And You can use the feedback that you get to do that, basically.
Perfect. So reflecting, improving, and if one station goes wrong, don't let it affect the next one. If asynchronous goes wrong, don't let it affect live. Quick important question I saw in the chat. Webcam or look at someone's eyes. Look at the webcam and it will appear to the interviewer as if you're looking into their eyes. So definitely look at the web. Hmm.
I think
Controversial.
I want to add to that. I think you need to test out your computer because for me, I'm always looking at my screen and I look like I'm looking ahead right now. It's about my camera. For some reason, my camera, if I look at it specifically, I start looking really weird, like I'm looking upwards. It really does depend on your computer. You need to be checking those things far in advance.
Find a friend. If you don't have any friends, I don't know, find a family member. Join a Zoom call with them. Sorry. Like hop onto a Zoom call with them. Practice interview questions and like see how you're coming across. Ask for feedback. Even if they're not medical, they could be like just say your sibling. And see how you're coming across on camera. Are you looking at the camera well? Are you doing good eye contact? Have you got good gestures? So on. And I think because we're getting to kind of 20 minutes overrunning, let's probably leave things there. As some people have left, we might be getting quite tired. Oh,
Can I
but
just
thank you
say,
so, so much, everyone, for coming, and very best of luck. Kieran, go for it.
sorry, I just wanted to talk about the people asking about the scholarship essay. How that works is that basically after you do your MMI and you like meet the grade requirements, in like about like September, I think I got an email from FEO saying like, oh, like based on your performance, we invite you to enter this kind of essay competition, and then you write the essay, and then later on they like tell you whether you got the money or not. That's basically how it works. But I'm not really sure about how kind of like selection for that happens, but it just does. But that's just another option for financing as well. Just to explain how that works. But yeah, that's it. Good luck everybody for your interviews and hope.
About accommodation, like honestly, whether you prefer staying close or commuting from the further out accommodation, it's literally completely up to what you prioritize and what you prefer. So also affordability, like some of the ones in South Kensington are really, really expensive. So yeah, just depends on personal preference.
So, just to interrupt, if anyone found things useful today, right? So we're running completely free event. Obviously, I believe in fairness. Tutors are paid for these free events. Generously, I would hope. They think so. Please, if you guys can fill in some reviews, so that we can continue to do stuff like this, widening access events like this, help you guys for your interviews. Please fill in some reviews. I've got the link in the chat. And I hope to see as many of you as possible getting into medical school very soon. So we had 100+ people here. From what I understand, there are less than 1,000 interview invites, so about 1 in 10. I'd hope that translates to about 1 in 6 successful Imperial offer holders, if not more. So very best of luck, everyone, and hopefully Akshita, Kiran, and Tista see you next year.
Good luck. Bye-bye.
Good luck.
Oh, bye
Bye,
everyone.
everyone. Bye.
Let's leave things there then. Thank you so much, everyone. Hopefully that was helpful.
Are we gonna
Stop
have
the
a